I think I'm on now. All right. Welcome back from our lunch break. It's good to have you all here with your smiling faces. We'll go ahead and continue on our agenda, and this is two agenda items that we took out of the consent agenda and put into our regular agenda. So this is right before our agenda item 18. So Kaylee, you want to take us there?
Good afternoon. Kaylee White, CWCB staff. So the two items that were taken off of consent agenda were oppositions that CWCB filed in two cases, and we were seeking ratification from the board. The first case was for Central Colorado Water Conservancy District, Division 1, case number 18 CW3106. The second case for the City of Aurora, Water Division 1, case number 18 CW3121. We've already filed the opposition in these cases, and we are seeking board ratification of those filings. So we have discussed these two cases with applicants in the meantime, yesterday, and a bit today. And applicants in both cases have agreed to just go ahead and continue discussions during the pendency of the case to come up with terms that would work to protect the in-stream flows.
Okay. Director Trick.
Yes, I'd just like to request that we consider these two items separately. I will be recusing myself from voting on, I believe it was 1A. So, yes, Central Colorado Water Conservancy District. I have a conflict of interest in that item. So if we could vote on these as two separate items.
We can sure do that. So we'll go ahead and take that one under consideration, the Central Colorado Water Conservancy District. Is there any discussion that the board might have? All right. Director Wells.
If there's no further discussion, I move approval of staff recommendation for item 1A.
It's been moved by Director Wells, seconded by Director Dutton, that we approve staff recommendation on agenda item 1A, which is to ratify the opposition in the case. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, we shall proceed to vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, agenda item 1B, Aurora.
So agenda item 1B, City of Aurora. Alex Davis is on staff at Aurora. She's here in the audience. She wasn't planning to say anything unless you all have questions for her. But I think she's confirmed that we'll continue discussions with Aurora to work out what we need to do with the case.
Okay. Alex, would you like to say anything or?
Well, why not? Good afternoon. For the record, my name is Alexandra Davis, and I appreciate you taking this off the consent agenda so that we had a little bit more time to talk to staff about what the concerns were and understand what the issues were. That was super helpful. I think I shouldn't say that because there's many new board members from my experience, but I hope that I would like to see that Aurora supports all existing water rights being properly protected by appropriate terms and conditions in water court cases. So we're very happy to work with staff and to find a solution that answers their concerns and answers ours. So thank you so much.
Well, thanks, Alex, and thanks for making it over. Yeah. And we appreciate it. Any questions for Alex or Kaylee? Director Trick.
Thanks, Alex. This is actually for Kaylee. And just a quick question. I won't belabor any of this, but so can you just go ahead and describe the potential for injury here to in-stream flow rights that the board owns and holds in this case, and the reason that the statement of opposition was filed?
Yes, Director Trick, thank you for your question. The change case in the Aurora case and in other cases on the Front Range which we are also participating in, ask for some specific change for specific uses, but also allow additional uses in undefined location via contracts with other users. So in trying to track down where might that occur, that water use occur, it's unclear in the decree. So rather than trying to narrow the decree, we just narrow that, okay, if the water is moved into an in-stream flow area, to make sure that that use doesn't injure an existing in-stream flow. That's all we're looking for.
All right, thank you. Kaylee. Any other questions? Director Wells.
I move that the board ratify the filing a statement of opposition as described in item 1B.
It's been moved by Director Wells, seconded by Director Hawkins, that we approve staff recommendation on agenda item 1B. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, we shall proceed to vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, same sign.
Nay, please.
Okay. So let it be noted. One. Also, make sure that we recused, Director Trick recused herself from the previous vote. So, all right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kaylee. Okay. Agenda item 18, the Water Supply Reserve Fund applications. Looks like we have Megan.
All right, good afternoon. Megan Holcomb, CWCB staff. I'll be presenting agenda items 18A and B. Let's see. Agenda item 18A is a request for $15,000 from the Metro Water Supply Reserve Fund account to support the feasibility analysis to connect Dominion Water and Sanitation District's water supply to Thunderbird Water and Sanitation District's main water tank. Thunderbird is a water receiving authority under the Chatfield Valley Water Supply Framework and has been discussing a potential water supply agreement with Dominion. The project could facilitate a significant reduction in Thunderbird's reliance on non-renewable, non-tributary groundwater, as Dominion's water source is predominantly renewable wise water. Thunderbird is matching the request with $5,500. No additional needs have been identified, and staff recommends approval. Barry Gager with Thunderbird Water and Sanitation District is here today and would like to say a few words.
All right.
Right
Welcome.
behind me.
Welcome, Barry.
You just state your name.
If you want to state your name and who you're with.
I'm Barry Gager with Thunderbird Water and Sanitation District out of Sedalia. Primarily, I just want to thank you for considering the application, and hopefully you'll find it acceptable. It's something that we're encouraged about. It's just a first step in what could be a significant journey. But yeah, on behalf of my fellow directors and my neighbors that are our customers, we really appreciate you taking a look at this. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, Barry. Thanks for making the trip. Are there any questions? Director Wells.
I mostly wanted to give a word of explanation. As you know, the WISE project involves Denver Water, Aurora Water, and the South Metro WISE Authority. In negotiating that agreement over the years, there was a certain amount. The idea was that there would be 10,000 acre feet on average over, so 100,000 acre feet over 10 years. The original signatories, Dominion is one, and others, contracted only for 7,500 acre feet of that water. And Douglas County decided that it would be a real shame not to have some way to make sure that that extra 2,500 acre feet could be available. And they were concerned most about the very small districts like Thunderbird, which has 178 taps, I believe, who are totally reliant on non-renewable groundwater, but wouldn't have the ability to really, enter into these sorts of negotiations by themselves. And so it was called the with Douglas County option contract, I believe. And it's actually gratifying to see a small district hopefully be able to, in fact, join the WISE project through Dominion. So this was sort of the plan, and it's nice to see it come to fruition.
Any other questions or discussion? Director Wells.
If no other questions, I would move staff recommendation on item, where are we?
18A.
18A.
It's been moved by Director Wells, seconded by Director Goebel, that we approve staff recommendation on agenda item 18A. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, we shall proceed to vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, same sign. Motion carries.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you, Barry. Agenda item 18B.
Agenda item 18B is a request for $5,000 from the Colorado Basin account to support the Northwest Colorado Council of Governments in developing model performance standards for water savings, as well as to offset costs to local governments for technical assistance to update their land use codes. The project benefits communities in the headwaters of the Colorado, Yampa, Gunnison, and South Platte Basin. 1 year ago, some of you first heard of a $25,000 water plan grant component of this project presented by Kevin Reedy. The grant was approved in January 2018. At that time, it was noted that Northwest COG was also applying for this $5,000 WSRF grant. It is only due to the timing of the Colorado Roundtable meetings and board meetings that this grant request is a few months later than that water plan portion. That said, no additional needs have been identified and staff recommends approval. Kevin Reedy will continue to serve as the project manager for this project. The applicant was not able to make it today, so I'm happy to take any questions.
Any questions for Megan? No questions. Director Dutton.
I move staff recommendation on item 18B.
It's been moved by Director Dutton, second by Director Randall, that we approve staff recommendation on agenda item 18B. All those, is there any further discussion? Seeing none, we shall proceed to vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you. Agenda item 18C. Craig.
Don't need it.
Yeah.
Less technology is better. Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the board. It's good to see you all again. This is agenda item 18C. It's an action item and a grant request recommended for approval by the Yampa White Green Basin Roundtable. And by the way, I'm Craig Gaboo for the record, CWCB staff. I'd like to thank everybody for their well wishes and their kind thoughts, and for the other staff members who covered my responsibilities at the roundtables and grant presentation while I was gone.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
It's good to have you back, Craig.
It's good to be back. Thank you. The applicant and grantee is the White River Conservation District for the project titled White River Algae Research Project. The purpose of this application is to assist the White River Conservation District and the United States Geological Survey to improve their understanding of the cause of excessive amounts of benthic algae in the White River over the past 4 to 5 years. Algae blooms decrease the recreational value of the river and indicate an ecosystem that is out of balance. This study will be integral in developing a better understanding of this ecosystem and provide tools for establishing mitigation plans. Doing so will improve the ability of the river to meet recreational, environmental, economic needs, and allow the elaborate system of diversion, storage, treatment, use, and wastewater treatment to continue. This study will provide exceptional information and background for a future integrated water management plan that could be developed within the next few years. This grant request is for data collection, analysis, and reporting to be performed in the years 2019, possibly through 2021. The applicant and third parties have provided a cash and in-kind match of just over $129,000 in the year 2018. That satisfies the matching requirements for a basin account grant. However, while a portion of the future matches and funding sources have been secured, at this point in time, some of those future matches and funding sources have not been secured, and leaves in doubt whether there is sufficient funding to complete the study in future years. Therefore, staff recommends the board conditionally approve this grant request
contingent upon the applicant providing documentation on a yearly basis to staff's satisfaction that pending matches and funding have matured into secured matches, whereupon staff will authorize the release of the yearly WSRF grant distribution as indicated in the water activity summary sheet provided in your notebook. I think that would be $41,000 in 2019, $33,000 in 2020, and $25,000 in the year 2021 if the study were to continue in those years. It may conclude earlier than that, depending upon their data collection and analysis. Other than that, there are no additional needs or issues have been identified. If approved, I will be the project manager for CWCB. The applicant requests $99,000 from the Yampa White Green Basin account, and staff recommends a conditional approval. Callie Hendrickson, Executive Director of the White River Conservation District, is in attendance today, and we're both available to take questions or address any concerns you may have. Thank you.
Thanks, Craig. Any questions for Craig? Callie, would you like to come forward and address the board? Since you came all this way, you should be able to say something.
Thank you for that opportunity, and thank you, Chair and board members. From Rio Blanco County, we greatly appreciate your consideration of this grant. It has been frustrating to see our White River turn green with algae, and we look forward to finding more about what it is. Our USGS will report to what we call the Technical Advisory Group, our TAG group, December 14th of what they've found this year, which will determine exactly how we will go forward in next year. So each year we stop and evaluate that and move forward. So any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Thank you.
Any questions for Callie or Craig? Oh, Director Wells.
This is very minor, and it displays my ignorance. There's a reference in here to funding from the Colorado State Conservation Board, and I don't know what that is.
I think Callie could explain that better because I had to ask her the same question.
Oh, good enough. And boy, do I welcome the opportunity to explain to people about the Colorado State Conservation Board. So as conservation districts, there are 76 of us within the state, local governments, and we are housed underneath the Department of Ag. And the State Conservation Board is that division under the Department of Ag that oversees our conservation districts. They get funding from state legislature and NRCS, but I guess this grant is specifically from the state legislature for matching grants. And so we applied for that $15,000 from each one of our conservation districts for a total of the $30,000 this year.
Director Dutton.
Callie, sorry you just sat down. My question's for you also.
Yes.
I think that it's reasonable for us to consider phasing the funds since we're looking at the yearly match. But will that impact you in any way of reaching your deliverables or being able to administer the project?
Thank you for that concern. You know, I really don't think so. Craig and I had quite a bit of discussion about this, and much of our match is coming from our local governments. So from both the town of Meeker, the sanitation district, the Rio Blanco Water Conservancy District. And so a lot of in the county and so forth, as you know, how local governments can only apply, you know, right now they can't even tell us for certain if they can get us the money for next year, but we have requested that. All of them have given verbal indication they're going to do their best to do it. And so we're pretty confident of that, as well as we have landowners upriver that have been very supportive. The Walton Foundation last year, there's another ranch up there, 2 more ranches that contributed significantly, but they all want to hear what was done this year and how we're going to move forward before they contribute. So totally understandable, appreciate it. I think we'll be okay. So thank you.
All right. Well, thank you. Director Gallagher.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Greg, great to see you again. It's wonderful to have you back. Callie, thank you for making the trip up here. Thanks to both of you for working this out. This is very complex, but it involves 10 different entities. And as Callie has pointed out, multiple local governments, which are restricted in what they can commit to outside the current budget year. With that, Mr. Chairman, I move staff's approval on item 18C.
It's been moved by Director Gallagher, second by Director Goebel, that we approve staff recommendation on agenda item 18C. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, we shall proceed to vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thanks, Craig.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Mr.
Callie.
Chair.
Now we have agenda item 19, and I just want to remind everybody, we do have sign up in the back, so if you would like to speak on agenda item 19 or 20, if you would sign up so that we can make sure that your voice is heard. So we'll go ahead and get started with agenda item 19, and we have Eric Sky with us.
Sweet. All right. Well, good afternoon, members of the board. For the record, my name is Eric Sky, Interstate Federal and Water Information Section staff. That was a mouthful while they try and load up the presentation here. I have the pleasure of just introducing this topic for you this afternoon. At our last board meeting, we had Glenwood Springs come out and discuss some progress that they've made on their recreational in-channel diversion application from 2013. And after that presentation, it was kind of asked that additional information be presented on how a settlement concept that was introduced in September really addressed some of the CWCB findings from 2015. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Mark Hamilton. And yeah. Oh, I thought I saw you raise your hand over there.
No.
Clearly the sugar from the cake is getting me a little.
Yeah, whew, you got rid of your blue teeth, though. That's good.
That's good. But anyways, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Mark Hamilton and Jonathan Kelly representing Glenwood Springs, and they'll be chatting a little bit about how this settlement concept is addresses those 2015 findings.
All right. Welcome, Mark or Jonathan.
Hello again, Mark Hamilton. I'm a partner with Holland & Hart. I want to also introduce my partner, Chris Thorne, from our Denver office, who's here with me today. Thank you for having us back. As you'll recall, we appeared before your board in September to begin the process of updating CWCB staff and the board as to the development of a settlement concept, the primary component of which is a call reduction provision that we believe addresses the maximum utilization and compact concerns that were brought up in the CWCB's findings in 2015. We began that process in September. There were some questions from staff that resulted from that, and then an invitation to return today to address several items. The items that we're here to address today include really four things. The first of which would be a brief update from me as to where things stand in the case with other parties. That's one of the things staff asked us to address, and we will do. The second item will be that Jonathan Kelly from Right Water, next to me here, is going to attempt to walk the board through his memorandum that was provided in advance of this meeting, which addresses the substantive issues that were raised by staff in connection with the 2015 proceeding and how those issues have been addressed since that time. Third, we would like to provide a brief update as some recent discussions we've had with Colorado Parks and Wildlife and additional developments concerning resolution of wildlife-related concerns in the case. And then finally, we'd like to talk about next steps to move from here toward what we hope will be a settlement of this case. So the first thing, where we are with the other objectors. In addition to CWCB itself, there are 5 remaining objectors in the case. These parties include the Home State Group, which, as you know, actually isn't one party, but nonetheless, I'll list them as such. The River District, American Whitewater and Western Resource Advocates, Gypsum, and Grand County. Here's a brief update as to where we are with each of those folks. With regard to the Home State Group, I believe your board has received a memorandum today confirming their position, which is generally, as we understand it, to join us in requesting that CWCB staff and board support the terms in the November 2nd proposed decree that was attached to Jonathan's memo to you. We understand that there are representatives from both Aurora and Colorado Springs to speak today in support of that, and so we'll let them make their own comments in that regard, but we're pleased to have their support today. As far as the River District, we've worked hard with River District staff and their attorneys. They were heavily involved in the crafting of the settlement provision, the call reduction provision. And we understand, we're still working with them, but we understand that they are anticipating placing this item on the River District Board agenda for approval at the forthcoming January meeting. That's their next available meeting time. And I believe representatives from the River District are also here today and can speak to that. As to American Whitewater and Western Resource Advocates, they have indicated to us that they support the same terms in the decree with the compromise call reduction provision. Rob Harris, an attorney from Western Resource Advocates, is here to address you today as well. With regard to the town of Gypsum, we were pleased to get confirmation from their council earlier this week that they are in agreement with the terms of the November 2nd decree, and they've asked for a stipulation. With regard to Grand County, they are still reviewing the decree, and we hope to get with them shortly after the Thanksgiving holiday, so that's still on our due list. But I'm real pleased to report that the great bulk of the parties I just walked through, we believe are largely supportive of the terms that we are requesting the board to approve, and that we've made good progress in particular since your September meeting. Next, I'd like to have Jonathan Kelly from Whitewater go ahead and walk us through the substantive issues that staff had identified and what the applicant's done to address those issues.
All right. Thanks, Mark. Jonathan, state your name and who you're with.
Jonathan Kelly with Whitewater Engineers. So some of this is a bit of a recap from the previous meeting, so I'll run through it quickly, but if you guys have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask. Just going through the original application and the flow claims, the base rate of $12.50 is consistent with the senior Shoshone existing water right. The only water rights that we are claiming above Shoshone are 2,500 CFS for a duration of 46 days total, with a 5-day event flow occurring around the 4th of July weekend. As you all well know, there are 3 findings of fact that the statutes require findings on: injury to in-stream flows, material compact impairment, and maximum utilization. In the 2015 proceedings, the first one had a positive finding, and the last 2 had additional work that needed to be complete. So that's what we've been working on since that time. Going back to the 2015 staff findings, they had positive findings on the percent of the historical flow below the 50%, that both there was upstream and downstream water demand. Compact compliance language, the provision that we had included was what they had requested. As I said, the in-stream flow water rights, there was no impact. The federal laws, the appropriate time limitations, which since that time we've put further restrictions that I'll touch on briefly. And then the economic benefit all received positive findings in 2015. The issues that they had identified in 2015 that needed additional work were the days of call and volume. They felt that the RISD had the potential to exacerbate the existing call on the river. The provision for reducing and or canceling the RISD, the design considerations, the demand for the RISDs, and environmental concerns. The major provision, as Mark highlighted, was the call reduction provision. Just to quickly recap as far as how that differs from some of the previous RISDs that had what's often referred to as a carve-out. We were not able to use that same procedure because we needed the 1250 CFS that was consistent with the Shoshone to not be subject to subordination, only those flows for that 46-day period. So that was really where the regulations would not allow us to claim 2 flow rates on a single day. So that's kind of what ended up, what caused us to go a different path than some of the previous RISD applicants had pursued. Another key is that the call reduction provision, although it's triggered by specific water right holders, since the magnitude of the flow that is being called by the RISD would be reduced, that would be reduced to all upstream users' benefit. Again, as I just mentioned, the key is that even though we call it a call reduction, what's actually reducing is the flow volume that is being, the flow rate that is being called. So I'll go through an example and how that will work. Also wanted to point out that the the provision protects a volume of 30,000 acre feet within that 46-day window, which is 10 times what had been previously identified by other RISIDs in terms of their carve-out, which had been 3,000 acre feet. In addition, one distinction here is that when we're tabulating the water rights, the annual yield, the cumulative annual yield, has a cap of 60,000 acre feet or 30 years. So once one of those two parameters is met, then the provision will no longer have any new water rights qualifying under this provision. Once the provision is actually enacted in a specific year, it has a limitation of 30,000 acre feet within that 46-day period. So again, just to put this in context, our flow claim volume above the senior Shoshone call during this 46-day window is about 129,000 acre feet. Of that, potentially 30,000 could be knocked off of that in terms of us reducing the call and it's reduced in an amount that is necessary to allow those qualified junior water rights to continue to divert where they otherwise would be able to, both physically and legally, if it weren't for the RISD water right calling. And again, the 30,000 acre feet is the cap. So in any 1 year, once the call reduction is enacted, that cumulative volume begins to be tabulated by the division engineer's office. And once 30,000 acre feet, if it were reached in any 1 year, then we would no longer be required to reduce the call for that year. To provide just a quick example, if an upstream junior water right would have the physical and legal ability to divert if not for the RISD call, and this is confirmed through the real-time accounting that would be provided by the in-stream flows, the stream flow gauges, and the telemetry at those diverters, then the city would reduce the flow rate of the RISD call sufficiently to allow those junior water rights to divert. And again, it would allow them to divert up until either they were satisfied or the 30,000 acre foot cap was reached. One of the other provisions was the environmental aspect. We've been working diligently with CPW staff. I won't go through the provision. Mark will cover that in a little more detail. So in summary, with regard to the engineering aspects, the staff concerns that were highlighted earlier in the presentation, the call reduction provision specifically addresses both the reduce call scenario and also the provides for reducing or canceling the RISD. Now, although this new provision specifically addresses the call reduction aspect of that, we do have the provision in there for canceling the RISD if a compact call were enacted. So that was some of the requested language by CWCB that we do have in our decree. Regarding the flow rates, the 2500 CFS, which is the flow rate that is in that 46-day window in excess of the 1250, is what the recreational boating community was extremely supportive of, that was their target flow rate for that reach under those stream conditions. The design is both efficient and includes a bypass channel for the environmental concerns that were expressed regarding the fish passage, and then again, the CPW coordination requirement. So I'll turn this back over to Mark now. Thank you.
All right. Are there any questions for Jonathan? Okay. Mark.
So now we're to the third point I outlined when I began, which is an update as to where we are with Colorado Parks and Wildlife, for CPW. In 2015, about the time of the hearing on this matter in Ignacio, we had worked hard with Jay Skinner at CPW and developed a provision for the decree that essentially serves to require, you want to put the revised provision up? Excuse me. This is a new version of the provision, but back in 2015, we developed language that was largely similar to this, that was for the purpose of ensuring that the applicant would diligently engage in consultation with CPW prior to the 404 permitting for any one of the 3 sites. And that language was acceptable to Glenwood at the time, and as far as we knew, acceptable to Jay as well. More recently, as the case has, as we've renewed our efforts to bring the case to conclusion and re-engaged with CPW, Jay came to me and requested that this provision be expanded. He wanted to make sure that if Glenwood built a particular structure or site and later wanted to add more structures to that site, that there would be a requirement that this consultation process resume or repeat itself, I guess, prior to the permitting going forward, and we were agreeable to that. He also asked that this provision be clear that if Glenwood ever wanted to go to another site, of course, that there would be additional consultation. And so we have expanded the language that's now before you to address those concerns that were raised by Jay, and we understand that these are now acceptable to him. He is here, and I think he does intend to address you in a bit on that issue. In connection with our discussions with CPW, another issue that remains to be dealt with is with regard to siting. From the applicant's perspective, each of the 3 sites, of course, are unique, and each of them will present their own issues with permitting, et cetera. But one of the 3 sites, Horseshoe Bend, the site that's in the middle, is of particular concern to CPW, as we understand it, because of additional wildlife issues that don't exist at the other 2 sites, most notably a bighorn sheep range in that area. We have been actively engaged with CPW and Jay discussing how we might go about resolving that issue. Where we are today on it is that we have discussed the development of it remains to be titled, it's been called an IGA or an MOU, but some sort of an agreement anyway between the applicant and CPW to confirm that the applicant is willing to prioritize the development of the other sites before it would get to Horseshoe Bend, and that if the applicant should endeavor to permit Horseshoe Bend, that there would be an additional pre-consultation requirement with CPW for purposes of addressing the additional wildlife issues that they have with this particular site. That agreement is not inked yet, but we are, again, working diligently with Jay, and we would hope that we could work with the AG's office and Jay to move that to conclusion in the near future before the next time this board would take up this issue. As far as where we are with next steps, from the applicant's perspective, our core request of the board will ultimately be to have your board direct your staff to engage with us to move towards a settlement stipulation to resolve CWCB's opposition to the case as a party to the case. In the course of doing that, however, we recognize, and that is all the applicant's request is really. But in the course of doing that, we recognize that the CWCB staff and maybe some members of the board have expressed a possible preference to also move forward with amended findings that would supplement or replace the 2015 findings. Although the applicant is not insisting on that step, as we don't think it's a legal prerequisite to finishing the case, we are certainly open to that. And if the board would like to proceed in that direction, then we would modify our request to be that the board direct staff to work with us in moving towards a settlement stipulation for your consideration, as well as the presentation of amended findings to accompany the settlement stipulation. And I guess finally, we would anticipate that the CPW piece would be a part of the stipulation and not expect that CWCB would take a position on settlement until you knew this issue had been resolved, which is what we intend to do. That's where we are on our 4 points. Is there any questions I could answer? I know there's some other folks who'd like to talk.
Thank you, Mark. Any questions from the board? Okay, thanks. We have 3 people that requested to talk, so I'll just call them up as I received them. So we have Patrick Wells with Colorado Springs Utilities. Oh, you have something, Eric?
Director Yon, if I may, could we have Jay Skinner come up and speak first?
I thought he was retired.
This will be his final act, other than giving us kick.
Okay. Absolutely. Welcome, Jay.
Jay Skinner, for the record. How appropriate. The last agenda item on the last day of the last meeting. Here I am.
There's another agenda.
There's another big one.
Well, I know. I almost,
We're not all here for you.
almost the last. But here I am at the podium. Yes, what Mark talked about here earlier is a accurate portrayal of what's happened here in the last month or so. We've had some really good conversations around the issues that Wildlife brought up, both at Ignacio and at the last meeting. I think that where we are with this term, we're in good shape there with the pre-consultation prior to a 404 permit on the sites, the size of the sites, design, and construction activities and timing. As it relates to the Horseshoe Bend site, I think that I've told the applicant that we totally understand the need for keeping your options on the table because things happen. We've basically been talking around the fact that Horseshoe Bend kind of sits in a third position for a variety of reasons, and it's certainly our least favorite of the three sites. And so it seems to me that a good resolution of this is that in addition to this pre-consultation as it relates to 404 permitting and those issues, that CPW be fully engaged with the city as they go through their site selection, alternatives analysis as they're moving through this process. And, if indeed we end up with the other two falling out and our least favorite site being the one that we move forward on, that, at least we've been involved in that process all along. And I think that, our local Glenwood Springs office has a good history with the city as partners on a variety of issues. And this would be one of them and would be no exception. So I think that whether this is an IGA or some sort of letter agreement or a stipulation to the water court decree, I can't say that I have a real preference to the vehicle, but I think we're all of the understanding that this is kind of an ongoing consultation with CPW, and particularly at the local level. It's not just Jay Skinner, but it's probably more like Perry Will, the regional manager, the regional fish biologist in Glenwood Springs, because those are the local community partners that they'll be dealing with all the way through this. And I guess my concern is that if it gets buried in a water court decree and not in some sort of external, it likely will get lost in the shuffle over time, and then we end up at the end and haven't done that ongoing due diligence. So I think that what Mark has proposed here, I think, while I haven't got the total okay from the regional and area folks, I've reached out to them, and I think that it's a good way to go. So I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right. Thanks, Jay. Any questions for Jay? All right. Thank you.
Yep.
Now are we good to go, Eric? All right. So I'll go ahead and call the people with public comment, and that's Patrick Wells with the Colorado Springs Utilities. Welcome, Patrick.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman Yan, members of the board. My name, again, is Patrick Wells. I'm the General Manager of the Water Resource and Demand Management Department for Colorado Springs Utilities. I am also a member of the Homestake Steering Committee. I'm pleased to announce that our subject matter experts and our attorneys, collectively as Aurora and Colorado Springs and the Homestake Partnership, reviewed the latest draft decree yesterday, and we're pleased to report that assuming all other objectors support the settlement with no other substantive changes to the decree, I believe we are ready to agree to this version of the decree, and this ends 3 years of really intense negotiations, collaboration with the applicant, and a lot of work finding compromise and middle ground on this. Homestake, going into this case, had two substantive issues. Those were that we felt that the RICD may impair the full development and use of our Colorado River Compact entitlements. We were also concerned that the RICD does not promote utilization, maximum utilization of waters of the state. And specifically for the Homestake partners, we were concerned that this RICD may limit our ability to develop our identified project and process, which is the Eagle River MOU project. So as we move into permitting and consider alternatives, there was the potential that we would need to file junior water rights at some point in the future to obtain the full amount of yield contemplated in the development of our Homestake 2 water rights. So those were our key issues going into this discussion with Glenwood Springs. I believe our positions were fairly consistent with the CWCB. We were in alignment by and large on those issues with the CWCB findings and concerns. We did testify on our concerns in the July 16th, 2015 hearing, and have been working with all stakeholders through the process. We believe this settlement protects the RICD priority and most or all of the flows for recreational use. Again, we believe it protects Homestake yields and the ability of water users to develop a reasonable amount of water under the compact entitlements above Glenwood Springs. And we also believe that there's a lot of potential for this to tie in with everything else going on in this stretch of the river. This is a very busy stretch of river, as you all know, and there have been a lot of agreements. One I'd like to point out specifically is the Upper Colorado Wild and Scenic Stakeholder Group. You all are aware of the in-stream flow that's been negotiated, the Grand County RICD on the upper end, and now this Glenwood RICD kind of on the lower end of that reach. I would like to encourage the CWCB board and staff to consider how this would fit into the Upper Colorado Wild and Scenic Stakeholder Group as a cooperative measure or potentially a long-term protective measure. So just another issue that I'd like the board to consider. The other thing I would like to point out is through these negotiations, it was important to Colorado Springs Utilities and the Homestake partners that these recreational in-channel diversion structures use water wisely and efficiently as possible. As a municipal water provider, we obviously take water conservation seriously within our city, and we believe that what we've worked through in the positive discussions we've had with the applicant, we've really been able to have a good, honest conversation about water use efficiency for non-consumptive structures, given the amount of water that RICDs can command through a particular reach. So with all of those statements, that wraps up my speech today, and be happy to take questions.
Any questions for Patrick?
Thanks.
Thanks, Patrick. Thanks for coming. And we have Robert Harris with Western Resource Advocates and American Whitewater.
Thank you very much to the board. Yes, my name is Rob Harris. I am an attorney with Western Resource Advocates. I am here on behalf of my own organization, as well as American Whitewater, to express our support for the settlement concept, as you just heard Mark and Mr. Wells describe. Frankly, this settlement concept, it's been a long time coming, as you know, and it represents the meeting of minds of pretty diverse East and West Slope interests. And it protects Glenwood Springs' recreation economy, which contributes, according to the Colorado Rivers Outfitters Association, $7.8 million in direct expenditures and more than $20 million in economic impact to that community. I think that this settlement also represents the Colorado way of doing things here. Our state's sort of remarkable ability to harmonize resource development and recreational interests and environmental values. I mean, it's our brand here, right? It's why we got Outdoor Retailer to come here. It's why average folks want to come here and start businesses. Moving to the settlement itself, we think that the city's made some pretty significant concessions here. As noted by Wright Engineers, this is 10 times more junior yield in a carve-out subordination provision than we've seen in previous RISIDs. There's a reduced hours of operation call. I mean, we're getting down to that level of detail in terms of the call. And we certainly support what the city and what Jay have done to make sure that the right is consistent with the wildlife and environmental values that we obviously share and this reach. To be blunt, I mean, some of this carve out it's a big deal. It does give us some pause because it does limit significantly the amount of time that this water right is going to be able to call. But frankly, that's the nature of compromise. Sometimes it's better to come to the table and recognize that everybody has legitimate interests and work towards a solution there. One point we do want to reiterate that, that these are the proper flow rates. I mean, these rates are the rates that stakeholders in the city, in the community have asked for, and we think that balancing that with this carve out is appropriate. So with that, I'll take your questions, or thank you very much for your time.
All right. Any questions for Robert? Thanks for coming.
Okay, thank you.
All right, we have one more. Peter Fleming with the River District. Welcome, Peter.
Thank you, Chairman Jan and CWCB board members. My name is Peter Fleming. I'm General Counsel for the Colorado River Water Conservation District located in Glenwood Springs. The River District is an objector in this RICD application. But as Mark Hamilton suggested, indicated, we do at the staff level anticipate recommending to the River District Board at its upcoming quarterly meeting next January that the River District Board stipulate to and support the RICD. We've been involved with the applicant in working on this carve-out proposal that's been presented to you. And we are supportive of the general concept of the carve-out proposal. We think it's a creative way to get around what we, in Colorado water law, sometimes a dirty word, subordination. So we don't call it that. That's not what it is.
It's a carve-out.
Mr. State Engineer. One thing I did want to mention, and Jonathan Kelly touched on this, and I think it's an important point, so it bears repetition and clarification, is that when you look at water rights development upstream of Cerro, upstream of Glenwood Springs in the Colorado River Basin, you are controlled by the senior Shoshone call. That's the calling water rights. So if you're developing, whether it's a golf course or a small community or adding on a water right to a municipality, you already are coming in with an augmentation plan, and the state engineer's office is already going to require you to augment almost certainly 100% of your depletions. So you've already come in knowing that whatever depletions you have, whether they would have impacted the RICD or not, are going to be replaced at points upstream of the RICD. It's only a smaller select group of water rights, bigger scale projects that have the capability of taking advantage for the large extent of these call reduction provisions because everybody else is already coming in fully augmented. It gets into a little bit of the weeds of water rights administration in Division 5, but I think it's an important point. Jonathan Kelly mentioned it, and I think it's helpful in addressing any concerns that the board might have about the impact of the RICD on water rights development. So that is all I have. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right. Any questions for Peter? None? Thank you, Peter. Anything else, Eric, Carly?
All right. So though the staff recommendation does say that this is informational item only, it also does say that the board may wish to deliberate and request for additional information or even take action on the request from Glenwood Springs to move forward either through amended findings or through a settlement.
All right. Director George.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to all of the people who've come here to talk to us more about this particular project. Forgive us for being cautious and careful and slow. This one is not an ordinary RICD. It's at an odd place in the system. It's got its own complications, and overall it becomes just a tricky, thorny, complicated project. So we've wanted to take the time, I guess, to bear with you while you figure out what it's going to take to get this accomplished. I'm very impressed with the amount of work that has been done and with the results. It sounds like you're almost there on the kinds of things that we expect here at CWCB. And many of the resolutions of conflict that you're making with others solves our own concerns and complaints. And for me at this point, and I've studied the current materials and memos and listened to what everyone said today, I think we're probably there also. And it would be my recommendation that we determine if we all agree to that. And if so, we can go ahead. I don't have a particular idea of what direction we choose. I'm kind of surprised the applicant would say they wouldn't want to see amended findings. I think I'd like to see positive findings in my decree, even though the settlement would overrule that. And I think we would be fine here. Certainly I would be fine with amending the original findings with the new information we have. But if it's not necessary, that's not my call either. And I don't care whether we do it today or in January. It might be wiser for us to ask staff to continue to work with everybody to finish dotting the i's, crossing the t's, giving the River District a chance for the board to act, and whoever else is left, and then do final approval of the settlement at that time. But it doesn't matter to me totally.
Director Wells.
Yeah, I guess I do have a preference, which is this is a different decree than the one we considered in Ignacio. And therefore, I think different findings are appropriate. I'd rather go in with a sort of a clean record. Here's a new decree, new findings, and not have to search to find out, to kind of remove those unfavorable findings from the record, so to speak, so that whenever anyone, including the judge, is looking for the findings, it'll all be in one place rather than 3 findings here and 2 findings over there. And to bring those back in January, hopefully that's not a problem, that delay, but it would be nice to have a nice, clean, fresh set of findings.
Director Trick.
I just have a question about the timing. So if if the decision or any decision today is delayed, what kind of trial deadlines are coming up in the case? Maybe Mark can speak to that.
Yes, the timing of the case is set that Judge Boyd has been updated on the fact that we were making efforts to come before you in September and again today, and has continued the case until I believe it's early February, recognizing that you have a board meeting in late January and the River District has a meeting in mid-January. So there is no trial set. There are no expert deadlines that are hanging fire because the judge has been updated on what we're doing right now. And certainly our preference would be to try to tie this up in January and move into that status conference about ready to submit the final decree to the judge. But as you know, we're working with your staff and the River District and moving towards that, then we'll keep the judge posted. But there are no immediate dates to answer your question.
Thanks.
All right. Any other questions, discussion? Well, we appreciate all your work on this, and it sounds like we're in a good place. And I think if I gather from the board here that we'll ask you to update the findings and we'll take action on this in January, if that's okay with everybody. So, all right. Well, thanks for all of your input, your hard work on this. We really appreciate that. And it looks like we're getting to a close resolution. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right. We'll move on to agenda item 20. What is that one? Oh, yeah. Okay. Colorado River Basin Drought Contingency Planning Update. We have Brent and Karen.
Thank you. Good afternoon to members of the board. Brent Newman, CWCB staff, and as is our custom, we're going to tag team this presentation between myself and Karen Kwan from the Attorney General's office. First of all, just to demonstrate our capacity for adaptive management, you'll notice that we put this last on the agenda this go around so that we're not ordering sandwiches with 3 agenda items left on the slate. So we're small incremental steps. Today, we'd like to update the board on the direction to staff that was given.
Could I just stop you for a second? If anybody wants to speak, I just wanted to remind them to fill out a little sheet so that we could have that. All right. Thanks. Sorry, Brent.
No problem. So today, we'd like to update the board on the direction to staff that was given at the October special meeting. That direction had 2 elements: to continue outreach to water users on drought contingency planning efforts, including the draft DCP documents that were released on October 9th, and to prepare for board review a policy statement to guide the assessment of demand management within Colorado. First, I'll briefly cover the outreach efforts we've engaged in since the October meeting, and I'll give a look ahead at some upcoming events and our plans for 2019. Then we'll turn to the policy statement, and we'll walk the board and the audience through the various background and elements of the policy statement. Then we'll present the staff recommendation and have an opportunity for public comment. So our outreach program that began last January has continued throughout the year, and this slide demonstrates the public events that we have engaged in just since the October 9th special meeting. These events have been located around the state, and they were kicked off with a webinar on October 9th in which Director Mitchell, Commissioner Eklund, and Karen took a deep dive into the conditions which have led to the states and the federal government into this drought contingency planning process, and then examined the draft implementing documents for the upper and lower basin DCPs. This webinar had 260-something participants as it was being streamed and viewed over about 170 times on YouTube, just checking it yesterday. So, and Water Congress assures us that was a new record for a webinar. The rest of our public events have been roundtables, IBCC meetings, and a couple of water workshops over at Colorado Mesa University, one hosted by the Water Center there and another by Grand Valley Water Users Association. Tomorrow, Amy Ostick and I are going to head up to Frisco to speak to the Northwest Colorado Council of Governments. And so the roadshow continues. We've already been invited to several roundtable meetings, water forums, and conferences through December and January. It's been a great experience having the opportunity to talk to folks about the conditions on the Colorado River, how the river is managed, and this new initiative of drought contingency planning. I'm going to turn it to Karen to talk about the timeline moving forward.
So this is regarding, good afternoon, Karen Kwan. This is regarding the timeline for hopefully landing the drought contingency plan among the 7 basin states. As you recall, the last time we were before you, it was the day before we were before you, that we were in Las Vegas talking to the 7 states, and they had agreed with Reclamation to approve the concepts that were identified in the draft drought contingency plan documents at that time. Since then, as Brent has
posited. We've been doing outreach with our water constituencies to try to get everybody up to speed on what those documents can say, as well as the other states, and the boards in those other states have been doing the same thing. What we're confronted with now is that we are trying to see who, if anybody, in the other states and their boards can be approving these documents. And that is a process that's ongoing. Some of the boards, for example, say in Southern California, have a process where they have to introduce the concept the first time, and then the next board meeting they have is when they can approve it. So it's an iterative process. That's going on in California. I was just told today that Southern Nevada Water Authority and the Colorado River Commission of Nevada have both approved the documents as of today. It's my understanding that Utah's Division of Water Resources has been authorized to sign the documents if they remain substantially similar to what they are today. It's my understanding that Wyoming is in a position to be able to sign so long as the documents remain the same and are substantially changed. There's some advisory components with the new governor-elect that will go along with that, but things are going in the right direction. And New Mexico has been advising and updating everybody in its state and is prepared to do that. And we're before you today with the same type of hope. The Upper Colorado River Commission will be meeting formally at the beginning of the Colorado River Water Users Association meeting in December 12th, I think. And it is anticipated that they could take formal action to approve the documents at that time. It's not known if they will yet or not. We still have to connect the dots. And there's some still outlying components. There's a lot of boards in the lower basin that still need to approve this as well. And they're going through that in due fashion. But that's hopefully going to happen between now and December. And at the same time, we have this component, if you'll recall, the part of the drought contingency plan is that we're all desiring the need for federal legislation to authorize it. So we're trying to see if there's a vehicle during this lame duck session to be able to attach a limited federal legislative piece that would authorize the drought contingency plan documents if and when we're ready to go. That doesn't mean that they would automatically be done and we have to implement. We would still have to sign all of the documents, but the legislation would hopefully allow the federal government and the secretary to execute the documents and then implement the agreements if everybody else signs. Then we have Arizona. And I'm not sure how much to say about that except for the fact that they're working diligently to see if they can get into agreement on how to implement the cutbacks that they would have to absorb in their own state. Their success is tenuous at the moment, but a number of people still are optimistic and have their fingers crossed that they will get across the finish line. If they do, then their legislature has to approve all of the documents, and that won't happen until at least January. And then we will go from there. I will say this is a very fluid timeline. It's just what we have on the docket right now. It can change depending on the federal government, depending upon Congress, depending on Arizona, depending on what you guys actually think in the long run, a number of things. But I will also say that something isn't going to end after all of this. And one of that is our intrastate outreach going forward. You guys have told us to do the outreach. We have been doing it, and I don't anticipate that ending. So that's going into the next years as we talk.
So now I'd like to turn the board's attention to the draft support and policy statements. As I mentioned earlier, these statements of the board were prepared pursuant to the board's direction at the October meeting. We have 3 statements included that are all intended to reiterate the board's leadership role in endorsing the DCP efforts of the 7 basin states and the federal government, in assessing demand management feasibility within Colorado, and in working with the Division of Water Resources in Kevin Ryan's office in compact compliance efforts. These statements are intended to be responsive to the input we received from our water users and our stakeholders to this point on DCP efforts and the assessment of demand management within Colorado, at the public presentations that we've done, in public comment at board meetings, and in the letters and emails received by the board on these topics. The statements begin with an introductory narrative intended to provide the background for these drought contingency planning efforts and why a statement of guidance from the board on these topics is appropriate. This introductory narrative also serves as an informational resource for interested parties, for people who are familiar with DCP efforts and demand management, or those who have never heard of them before. A citizen or stakeholder who downloads or picks up these policy statements won't have them simply out of context or flying solo. They'll also have in hand the essential background and facts describing the challenging hydrology, the challenges of managing such a valuable resource across state lines, and the role of the CWCB in problem solving for the future. This introductory narrative also provides some background on the demand management conversation to this point, describing the opportunity provided by the Demand Management Storage Agreement included in the Upper Basin DCP. And with that background in mind, we'll move to the three statements, and Karen will kick us off.
So the first statement we have is the statement of support. And it's a statement of support that the staff and the AG's office staff recommend adopting because it's a statement of support for the drought contingency plan itself. This is important, we think, because if we don't do anything, uncertainty and insecurity prevail. What the DCP does for the Upper Basin is allows us to have the opportunity to develop and implement, if we decide that we need to implement, tools to help us maintain our own destiny and control, and hope that we can avoid curtailment that would be imposed upon us. At the very least, uncertainty in how the reservoir systems would be operated to protect against possible crisis, and that could invite greater risk of conflict, disputes, and litigation. The result could also be that the Department of the Interior decides that they have to take matters into their own hands to assess, rectify a public health and safety situation. What these tools are intended to do is help us maintain our control in directing how the water would be used to avoid those situations. The DCP is also something for the Upper Basin that is not intended to just help the Lower Basin. This is for the Upper Basin's benefit. The program isn't simply an acquiescence to the Lower Basin's needs. Regardless of whether the Lower Basin actually lands their part of the DCP or not, the Upper Basin DCP provides a foundation upon which we can better plan and prepare for continuing water uses, even in variable, unpredictable water hydrology. The elements of our Upper Basin DCP are appropriate for this time and at this time. Both elements secure the opportunity to develop and employ the tools that will help reduce the risk to currently available water supplies. It's not a foregone conclusion that we will develop and use them, but we will have the opportunity to use them. And it will help the Upper Basin be prepared should the drought conditions persist. What are the two elements? Just to remind you, they're the Drought Response Operations Agreement. This secures the role for Colorado to decide in how available Upper Basin water should be used to protect existing water uses, not future water uses, but the existing water uses. Also, the environmental resources that are so precious and valuable to us, as well as maintain hydropower production that does provide significant energy sources to a number of our constituencies. And not to forget, it also helps us provide compact compliance. The agreement allows the state, with the other Upper Colorado River states, to be involved in planning on how to use the CRISP storage so we can protect critical elevations at Lake Powell and avoid these crises. Without it, it doesn't mean that those decisions won't be made, they'll just be made without us. And so we would like to make sure that we have a role and can control how that would happen. The other element that we're focusing on in the DCP is the Demand Management Storage Agreement. That is not guaranteeing or standing up demand management program anywhere in the Upper Basin. What it does do is create and authorize, with Congress's approval, a storage account for us to be able to do what we need to do if we decide we need to do something in the future. What that decision would be is something that is the basis of the policy that we're going to be talking about here in a second. Without securing storage for any conserved water supply in the Upper Basin, we have no solid foundation to potentially develop the necessary tools we need to do to be prepared to avoid a compact curtailment. There's just no incentive to investigate the hard questions and very, very difficult differing opinions we'll need to overcome. If we conserve water and have nowhere to put it, why would we conserve it? So we need the bucket to be able to preserve it. And this is our time to do it. With the Lower Basin needing a DCP and congressional authorization for their activities, this is the time we have the leverage to be able to secure congressional authorization to do the same thing. If we don't seize it now, there's a very good chance we will not have that ability to do it in the future. So The other element is the ask that this is, the demand management storage agreement, is a heavy ask from the lower basin perspective. This is allowing us to take water that they would otherwise think should be part of the system and not have it be released to them under the operating guidelines that we operate. This is our water, and it stays our water and is used as our water until as we need it. That is not something that they're going to let happen lightly, and they've let it happen if we can get this through the finish line. So those are the reasons it's important. It's important to remember, as I say, that the demand management, the storage authorization would be in perpetuity. It's not something that goes away. We will have it then. How we use it and how we access it is what's conditioned, and how we need, and is the thing we need to make sure we're doing it in the way we want to be doing it. At the same time, as I said, it's key to the understanding of demand management that it is not guaranteeing, warranting, requiring, or mandating that we actually have a demand management program. It just allows us the opportunity to investigate it, and if we do have one, then we can use it. So it remains up to the Upper Basin states, including Colorado, who's been a significant leader in the Upper Basin. It provides us the time and the authority to investigate what makes sense to us under demand management. If we decide we don't think any of it makes sense, we don't need to do it, and nobody will have a demand management program. But if we actually coalesce and can find a way to be able to work together to control our own destiny, we will be able to have a tool that will help us through that. And that's what the goal of the demand management storage agreement is. And for that reason, we suggest a unified support, and that's what the statement makes, is that the CWCB would be showing unified support with Colorado's commissioner to the Upper Colorado River Commission to endorse the DCP and make sure that it can get across the finish line. We're not going to be the ones standing in the way. I'm still up. So that's the beginning part. Then we have the demand management policy statement. We have a storage bucket, hopefully at some point in time, but we want to make sure and provide assurances that we're not going to go off a cliff and do something crazy. What we're trying to do is provide clarity in the process and strategy for conducting demand management investigations and developing a demand management position for the state. It calls for a process with some directional sideboards without overly constraining the purpose of demand management investigations as a whole. So we're going to kind of walk through these. We have a number of paragraphs. The first paragraph is exactly that. It's basically recognizing the CWCB's role and authority and responsibility to develop a water policy approach regarding demand management within Colorado. As the water policy agency for the state, that is your duty and is something that we need to recognize. Second, it identifies the strategy for how to go about that investigation of what the state's position should be. That is not something, you'll note, it does not say something to the effect of we're going to go back in a corner and decide it on our own. The exact opposite. We're going to convene a process for investigating demand management and vetting considerations before the board. That process is not simply decided one day. It will be a process that is developed and followed to help create an informed position with input throughout the state. It operates, and then the second paragraph is that it's going to operate subject to the terms of that demand management storage agreement. We can't, if we have federal authorization to do the demand management storage agreement, we have to follow the demand management storage agreement. Thankfully, a lot of the elements of the demand management storage agreement are things that we like. They're things that we want, and we've called some of them out in the policy to give an example, but they're not exhaustive. The important parts is that it's the water conserved. The way we will investigate demand management in Colorado is that water conserved will be stored in the initial units of the CRISP Act. The water conserved will only be used for compact compliance purposes. It's not just a general water bank. It is specifically for compact compliance. It will not be released, as I said, to the lower basin under the general guidelines for system water. This is something that is held back and only released at the request of the Upper Colorado River Commission for compact compliance purposes. And it will be subject to volumetric limitations. What those volumetric limitations will be, we have a general one in the demand management storage agreement for 500,000 acre feet between now and 2026, but that can change going forward, and it's something we can investigate and be comfortable with of what that volumetric limit should be. And we should also emphasize that this is subject at this moment, both as a requirement of the lower basin as well as the other upper basin states. It's subject to the water had to have been consumptively used in prior years before it can participate in a demand management program. The payments and how this would all work, the lower basin is concerned that water would be hidden, that would otherwise have been system water. Upper basin entities are worried that unless the water had been used, we're paying people to do something that they didn't have or weren't using in the first place. So those are stepping stones at the moment on how this will go forward and how we perceive investigation going on this process. And that's why we think there are things to highlight for the board in the policy.
The fourth element of the policy statement expresses the intent of these statements to continue to operate within the guidance of Colorado's water plan, which is the foundational document of water policy for this board. These policy statements do not override the aspirations of the water plan. These goals and actions that we identified as part of that process, the Colorado's water values, the commitment to a productive economy, the vibrant and sustainable cities, viable and productive agriculture, and a robust recreation and tourism industry. These are all still the lay of the land, and this is still what the board and staff strive to do through our actions at every one of these meetings. We are highlighting through this policy what is relevant to the discussion at this point. This doesn't negate the need to consider the water plan as a whole. To demonstrate that consistency with the water plan, we've called out two areas of the plan that deal very specifically with drought contingency planning and the efforts to provide certainty for Colorado River water users. First, Chapter 9.1 of the water plan outlined the statewide strategy that we mentioned a couple of times to the board in our public presentations. That the state of Colorado will support strategies to maximize the use of compact water while actively avoiding a compact deficit. The efforts of the states and DCP and the interstate efforts within Colorado to better understand demand management and how it could function fit firmly in this description of strategies. As we've called out in previous board presentations, Chapter 9.1 also laid out some of the initial concepts of demand management that we're still working with today, an effort that is based on voluntary, temporary, and compensated reductions in eastern and western slope consumptive use. Then you have this reference to conceptual framework, and I'm going to quote directly from the framework. The intent of the conceptual framework is to represent the evolving concepts that would need to be addressed in the context of a potential new Trans Mountain diversion. The framework also includes several topics that are not exclusively linked to a new TMD, but are important actions related to Colorado's water future. These include conservation, increased storage, environmental resiliency, and a collaborative program to address Colorado River system shortages. Sounds familiar. Principle 4 of the conceptual framework, very similar to Chapter 9.1 of the water plan, identified this early conversation about drought planning efforts and demand management, and it also identifies and clarifies the role of the roundtables and the IBCC in informing these interstate and intrastate processes. Inclusion of these points, the purpose of that is to refer back to the water plan and the consensus-based approach that resulted in the water plan, and a reminder that these drought contingency planning and demand management assessment efforts have been a part of the conversation of Colorado's water users and our stakeholders for a while now, even to the point of including them in a consensus document supported for inclusion in the water plan, like the conceptual framework. Paragraph 5, this section continues the discussion that began with that Chapter 9.1 and Principle 4. As we move forward in assessing demand management as a tool within Colorado, we're going to investigate that approach identified in Chapter 9.1, voluntary, temporary, and compensated reductions in consumptive use of water that would otherwise deplete the flow of the Upper Colorado River system for the specific purpose of helping ensure compact compliance. The second part of this statement is a reference back to the Demand Management Storage Agreement that Karen mentioned, part of the Upper Basin DCP implementing documents. This document provided that the potential account in Lake Powell, which will not be subject to release under the interim guidelines, could also potentially store waters imported from outside the natural Colorado River watershed. To make this explicitly clear, there are no such evaluations currently underway. The Upper Basin states and the UCRC are not currently studying importation of water from other water basins. However, the principals of the Upper Basin states did not want to foreclose this option, should such an evaluation seem feasible or necessary in the upcoming years. Though we're retaining this flexibility as part of the Upper Basin Demand Management Storage Agreement, our efforts will continue to be focused on this voluntary, temporary, compensated reduction of consumptive uses. In Section 6 of the policy statement, we are gearing our assessment efforts of demand management to operate in a way that would avoid disproportionate negative economic or environmental impacts to any subbasin or region within Colorado while protecting the legal rights of water rights holders. The Colorado River and the benefits of that river touch all four corners of Colorado. In this statement, we are striving to ensure that the benefits and burdens of such a demand management program are shared across the state. As part of that analysis, economic and environmental impacts will be assessed as part of the process. In conducting such an assessment, the board is committing to work with our water rights holders and stakeholders to assess the feasibility of a demand management program that attains roughly proportionate contributions of water consumptively used from the Colorado River system over a given time frame from participants on both sides of the divide. The intent behind this statement is to set the table for a conversation and an analysis of how this sort of proportionate contribution-based program could operate. The concepts associated need to be investigated and understood by ourselves as staff and board, but also by our stakeholders and our partners as these concepts evolve. At this point, we do not want to limit the discussion, as we want to motivate that discussion and encourage a thorough conversation and a feasibility analysis with all the potentially impacted parties. However, the board and staff will welcome continual information from and the assertions by our different stakeholders that such an investigation should be limited to roughly proportionate post-compact depletions. In formulating the wording of this statement, proportionate as used here indicates that we want to work to share the benefits and burdens of a program. It does not indicate an intent to prescribe in this statement specifically how that will be accomplished. This is not intended to suggest a greater share of responsibility by one side of the divide or other, or between individual river basins. These two statements demonstrate the continued Water Conservation Board commitment to two key institutions. One, ensuring that any potential demand management program aligns with the prior appropriation system and pertinent state law, including the requirement that the demand management actions do no harm to other water rights holders, those who choose to participate in such a program and those who do not. And statement number 8, the board reaffirms its commitment to a transparent and fully informed process. The input, opportunities, and challenges identified by our water rights holders and stakeholders potentially impacted by such a program must inform the state evaluation of demand management, and the strategies must be subject to a public review process.
So, and the last paragraph is regarding our work and collaboration with the Upper Colorado River Commission. We can decide what we want to do and how we want to do it, but unless we can marry it with the role and authority of the Upper Colorado River Commission, we don't have a program. So what we need to do is maintain how the communication and the interaction between the commission, and that is what this policy is trying to this policy paragraph is trying to outline. So overall, the policy provides the guideposts for the CWCB to direct investigation of demand management within Colorado without confining opportunities to specific actions that are yet to be thoroughly vetted and investigated. There are a lot of steps that will need to be considered throughout the way, and water users and stakeholders will have an ongoing voice and opportunity to convey concepts, thoughts, opinions, considerations, and concerns to help frame and formulate the state's demand management policy going forward. So that's the demand management policy one. Then we have the last statement, which is compact administration. This refers to involuntary curtailment of water uses within Colorado. Nobody wants that to happen. While demand management activities would be intended to try to avoid that situation and provide a proactive mechanism for Colorado to be going forward, there's no guarantee that demand management will work to the level that we need it to completely avoid curtailment. Whether it be hydrology persists and gets worse immediately and we're not ready to stand up a demand management program, or that there's not enough money to fund a demand management program, or there's not enough interest and participation, whatever it is, there's lots of reasons why we might not have a full operational demand management program in the appropriate time. In light of that, there is a policy statement that we're proposing that the CWCB adopt, recognizing how an analysis of that would look like. And first, it recognizes and respects that it is not their role necessarily to determine all of how that would look like, because it's Division of Water Resources' responsibility to administer the compact if we're to maintain compliance. However, I think that we have struck a good place where we can have the recognizing hydrology and recognizing unpredictability of the demand management program, that we can have a situation where the CWCB can help collaborate with the Division of Water Resources and the constituencies that we have in front of us to be able to investigate what makes sense in an involuntary curtailment situation. I will recognize, I would be remiss if I was, as a state's attorney who represents the Division of Water Resources, if we are in compact violation, this Division of Water Resources has to act. outside of a compact violation, there's a situation where people are concerned that the state Division of Water Resources is going to act in a vacuum. And I have every assurance that's not going to be the case. And as this policy and the board is trying, and we're recommending that the board adopt, is saying that they also have every assurance that that would not be the case, and we would have an open process going forward.
Finally, our staff recommendation, adopt the policy. But before that, we've got, I think, some public comment. Ready to roll. Director Young.
All right. Thanks, Brent and Karen, for all your hard work and for your explanation here. Is there any questions for Brent or Karen at this time? All right. So we'll go ahead and go with, and if anybody still would like to talk, we have 4 people that have signed up to speak. So if there's anybody else.
And before we start the public comment period, I just want to call the board's attention to a letter that we distributed to you guys from the Front Range Water Council expressing support for this policy statement as it is. Bennett Rayleigh and a few other folks from the council are here. They can speak on behalf of that, but just wanted to call attention to that letter.
All right. Thank you, Brent. So I'll just call them up as we received them. So Kathleen Curry with the Upper Gunnison District. Welcome, Kathleen. Thanks for coming.
Good afternoon. I'm Kathleen Curry, and I'm wearing 2 hats, the Upper Gunnison River Water Conservancy District, and I chair the Gunnison Basin Roundtable as well. So neither of those boards have met to discuss this policies specifically. I think the Upper Gunnison mailed a letter to the board and maybe to Brent. I'm not sure if you all have seen it, but it reiterates the points that were set forth at the last meeting. I think that was in September, right? Where the Colorado River Water Conservation District and the Southwest District had outlined a number of criteria that we were hoping to see adopted or supported expressly by the CWCB. So the draft policy in front of us, I think, in large part included the criteria we had identified, the issues that we were concerned about, and I do appreciate that. Again, the boards haven't met to actually say, hey, we think this policy is great. So I can only tell you that I've distributed it, and the roundtable meets Monday. And then our Upper Gunnison District meets the following week. So we'll be talking about it for sure. You know, at first I thought it was silent on the issue that came up last time that was really concerning, this notion of involuntary preemptive curtailment to avoid involuntary curtailment. And we were concerned about that. And I know y'all heard that. I think it was item 5 that said, no, wait, it was 7, I think, that said that the notion here would be to comply with current water law. And I do believe Brent or Karen mentioned that included the prior appropriation doctrine. So I think that right there, if you adopt the policy the way it's written, gives us some certainty. I kind of skimmed over that when I read it, and now I feel a little bit better. So I want to say thank you for taking into consideration our concerns. I'm not sure about the time frame. You know, it didn't really say exactly what the time frame would be for the public process, but I wanted to let you know that the Gunnison Basin Roundtable would love to provide input or be a place where you could go and visit with a lot of different types of water users, since it's a comprehensive membership. And so we stand ready for that, the Upper Gunnison District as well. And I hope that, you know, you'll consider us in the future, in the near term, and we will definitely stay at the table and stay involved, and we appreciate your consideration.
All right. Thank you, Kathleen. Any questions for Kathleen? Thank you for your statements, and rest assured, this is the beginning, and we will make sure everybody is involved in the process as it goes forward. Continuing on, Andy Mueller with the Colorado River District.
Hi. Thank you, Chairman Jan. Peter Fleming, I think we both signed up, so we can kill 2 birds with 1 stone.
Nice.
Andy Mueller and Peter Fleming with the Colorado River Water Conservation District. First, I want to start out by thanking the staff, the Attorney General's office, and the board members who clearly worked extremely hard to craft a policy that addresses not only our concerns that we've expressed to this board, but I believe the concerns of every water user who came before the board in September and who have weighed in previously. And we greatly appreciate the fruits of your labor on that, and we thank you for doing that. We do, I think we're in a situation, Peter and I, where we cannot represent that our board and therefore our district is in support of this policy because our board has not yet had a chance to meet, given the fact the policy was released Monday afternoon. We have scheduled or are in the process of scheduling a special meeting the Monday after Thanksgiving, and we anticipate a vote at that meeting. I would say that myself and Peter as general counsel, myself as general manager, will be recommending to our board to support this policy. We recognize that it doesn't have all the words that maybe we would like and doesn't have all the things, but we understand compromise and we appreciate, again, what's in there. We also do appreciate the clarification today. We had some concerns about paragraph 6 of the demand management policy itself. And I think the staff clarifying the intent of that paragraph today on the record was very helpful, and we really appreciate that as well. We do also, I will tell you, strongly support the way the policy is written in terms of the demand management policy statement, and then followed by the compact administration policy statement. And we think that clarification, again, is a very positive one for water users on the western slope. And we think, frankly, throughout the state who depend upon clarity and water administration and certainty in the way things happen in this state. So with that, I just want to say thank you, and we really appreciate it. So.
Well, thanks for your statement. Peter?
Peter Fleming for the Colorado River District. Thank you.
Do you want to repeat that?
Are there any questions on it?
We have any questions for Andy or Peter? All right. Thank you very much. All right, we have Bennett Rayleigh with Front Range Water Council. Welcome, Bennett.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. You have the letter from the Front Range Water Council supporting the policy as written. The only thing I'll add to that is that we think that it is an appropriate and balanced way to address competing interests. And we appreciate the time and effort put in by staff and the Attorney General's office, and very much encourage you to adopt it. Thank you. Any questions?
Any questions for Bennett? Thank you. Thank you for your statement. And last, but certainly not least, Bruce Whitehead with Southwestern Water Conservancy District. Thanks for coming, Bruce. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and glad to be here. I hope it's okay. I asked Beth Van Verst to come up and prop me up if we need to. So thank you to the board here today for allowing us to address you and talk about a very important issue and dear to us all in Colorado. I think on my slip I put I was for. Mr. Chair, could you finish that?
For Colorado.
For Colorado. And I think that's why we're all here. We're for Colorado. Believe it or not, I should introduce myself again for the record. Bruce Whitehead. I'm the executive director for the Southwestern Water Conservation District in Southwest Colorado. It's in our title. I have next to me here is Beth Van Verst, our legal counsel, and she's been a great asset to me in our district in this conversation, so thank you, Beth. And then I also have our board president that made the trip up, Bob Wolf, is back here if there's any questions for Bob, and also Don Schwint, that's the appointment from Montezuma County. First, on behalf of Southwest District, I want to make sure that you know we appreciate the efforts of this board and of the staff and of the Attorney General's office and their staff, and also James Eklund, our commissioner, for tackling this difficult issue driven really by hydrology of drought contingency planning and demand management. Also, I know that we probably have a lot of people listening in today. This has been a hot topic throughout the state, I think it's fair to say, but in our part of the world, there's been a lot of interest in drought contingency planning and also demand management and this policy. So I think I want to say that we appreciate all of the local input and support that we've received for this process, and that we will continue to seek that input in the future along with Colorado Water Conservation District. The Southwest Board, similar to the River District, has not had an opportunity to meet to discuss this policy. We apologize for that, but as you know, timelines are tough sometimes. But our staff, Beth and I, have both reviewed this and believe after the review that this has addressed most of our concerns. And I think we are anticipating that our board will support Colorado moving forward with the demand management program, with the Upper Basin Drought Contingency Plan in light of the review of the interstate agreements that we've all had a chance to look at now, as well as the draft CWCB policy. And with that, I again just want to say thanks for the opportunity being here today. It is a good day. The sun is shining out there. We have snow in the mountains, and we're hopeful we get a lot more.
Yeah.
So thank you again for all your efforts, and we'll move forward.
All right. Thank you, Bruce. Is there any questions for Bruce or Beth?
Are you sure?
Thanks for making the
All right,
trip.
thank you.
Brent.
I have received some guidance from Director Mitchell that the staff recommendation may be expired.
That's what I was wondering.
The policy statement itself evolved a little bit between I wrote this memo and the draft memo is being posted on Monday. So staff recommendation would be that the board adopt the draft policy as posted on the Water Conservation Board website on Monday, November 12th.
All right. Director Hawkins.
I move to adopt staff recommendation on agenda item 20.
It's been moved by Director Hawkins, seconded by Director Dutton, that we approve staff recommendation on agenda item 20. Is there any further discussion? Director Gallagher.
Yes, I do recognize that our board, our roundtable met last night and had some deliberations about this, and thank you to the Jim Pokrant for coming up to Craig to make that presentation. They did add in some additional words in there, but I believe that those additional words were added as a suggestion to recognize the differences between the individual basins. However, I believe the first sentence of paragraph 6 really addresses all of that, regardless of whether you're a West Slope Basin or an East Slope Basin, or South Slope or North Slope Basin. It's, I think, all-encompassing. So I don't think that they actually endorsed the policy per se as the other and made a formal recommendation for the policy, but they said that would help them. I believe their concern has been addressed in that first statement. So I would, pending support from all these roundtables, I would also support the motion.
Director Wells.
Yeah, I want, since everyone's here, or on the phone, I suppose, I'd like to say a few things about this drought contingency plan and where we're headed. The policy isn't perfect from my perspective either. I had a few more grammar things I really wanted to take care of, but it contains the spirit and intent of what we're trying to do. And I have a challenge that I want to make to everyone involved. Two parts to this. One is the country that we live in has spent a lot of time in the last few months focusing on the differences among people, red or blue, left or right, rural or urban, so on and so forth. And I want to make sure that we in Colorado don't fall into the same thing with East versus West. There clearly is more that unites us in the ability for Colorado not to be subject to a compact call than there is in the details of how we might manage to avoid that. The second part of my challenge to everyone is to think of this. I don't get burdens out of this out of this idea. If it's temporary, voluntary, and compensated, no person, no water right holder participates unless they really want to, unless there's something of benefit in it for that water right holder. And particularly with agricultural water users, I would like for us, I'm going to challenge you all to dream up a program that makes everyone better off. So, for example, and people have heard me say this, but I really believe we could do it, is to turn this into some sort of soil health program. And that is working with NRCS. And now that I know there is such a thing as the State Conservation Board, I think we should bring them into this so that instead of taking out of production and land lying fallow, why can't we do cover crops? Why can't we do things that add nitrogen to the soil? I'm clearly not talking about out of expertise, but I know there are such programs. And so we ought to be able to figure out a way to get some water into Lake Powell without doing harm to anyone, and really making it a program that will benefit all the participants to the extent that we can. So that's really my little sermon, but I see no reason that we can't approach this in that way, because we're Coloradans, for God's sake, and we're not anybody else. So that's my wish, and I'm glad everyone's here. I'm glad we managed to come up with some language that everyone can live with, and now let's do the fun part.
All right. Director George was next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is really good work. It wasn't always clear this was going to happen. And I want to say particularly to Karen and Brent and your team, thank you, because all of us together probably unwittingly put you through your own brand of hell. And the great thing is that you didn't let us drive you away. You stayed on it. And everybody else, because we knew that there is no other option, doing nothing is simply not an option. We all knew this. And so I think because we're all of goodwill, we also stayed on it and wrestled the pieces to the ground one at a time. And so for all of us to come here today with this good work product and your willingness all across the state to say, okay, I understand. If I'm going to get any benefit from this, I'm going to have to give something. And you've all stood up to say, that's okay, that's how we'll do it. So I think we've really done something important for the state today. And I'm going to vote yes happily. This is the right thing for this board to be doing. And thanks to all of the folks who support us on this policy.
Thank you, Director George. Director Randall.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to comment a little bit on process more than substance here. I'll just note that we have standing room only at a Water Conservation Board meeting. That doesn't happen every meeting. What's that?
Twice.
It's happened twice? In your
No.
Okay.
Last meeting.
Okay. Well, I will just say, we can all agree that that is due to the impact and the importance of this work, as Director George just so eloquently said. I think it also shows the level of participation here. And I just want to say how much I appreciate the interest and the willingness of the water rights holders and all the other stakeholders to be informed, to get involved, to provide input and to really truly be dedicated to a good result here. So thank you for that. This document is without question better for your participation. It doesn't say what we'll do, but is a commitment to show how we'll approach these issues with common themes of investigation of options and transparency as we go about the business of the state. So again, thank you. I'm confident that with your participation and your broad support for this document, it will ensure that this is an enduring approach. So thanks.
All right, thank you. And I would just like to say thank you again to Brent and Karen and Becky and everyone that's worked on this as in the Attorney General's office. It's a big deal, and I appreciate it a lot. And I want to thank all the people out there that participated in this, and your input and your suggestions. And I hope you realize that we did take that into consideration. The staff took that into consideration, and they were walking a fine line. And so they tried to do that. And I don't just appreciate your suggestions and your input, but the way it was done. At first it was a little rough, but when we met in Steamboat, it was done with character and integrity and respect. And that's what I like about our water community, is that that's the way we treat each other. Just like Director Wells said, regardless whether we're Democrat or Republican or whatever, environmental or ag, we try to do that. And as a board, I can guarantee you that we try to put on our statewide hats whenever we take up issues like this. So I hope you all understand that. And lastly, I'd like to thank my fellow board members, because I know there's several of them that put a lot of time into helping the staff craft this as well. So this wasn't just directed by staff alone. The board members had a lot of input in this as well. So I just want to thank them as well. So I'll let Director Mitchell finish up.
All right, so speaking on behalf of the board, I just wanted to express some appreciation for the interest and willingness of all the water rights holders and stakeholders that are so very informed. And I'd love to get involved and provide input, and this product is better because of that. And so I want to thank you for that. I know it was rough at times, but we appreciate that. The hydrologic realities that are confronting us on the Colorado River are not lost on this organization. Just like the Colorado River touches the four corners of the state, it touches everybody and affects us in some way that is sitting up here today. So the support and the policy statements that were issued today serve as a call to action to be prepared and not simply wait to react to that variability. And so this is the first step, not the last step. I expect many more board meetings like this. So I want to just make sure that we all remember that the first statement regarding the DCP clearly sets forth the state's unified support for the DCP. This helps avoid what otherwise would become a potentially emergency period. And that's so important to us right now. Then the demand management policy establishes those guideposts for investigating mechanisms for avoiding a compact curtailment. The policy isn't so detailed that it constrains us, and it helps us get to a better place. So finally, the statements really take into account the board's approach for considering a compact administration and working with the state engineer's office. The common theme through all of this was investigation and transparency. That's what we stand for. The same way, the similar process to how we develop Colorado's water plan is the way that we intend to do this and have done this and will move forth in the future. So that helps us for whatever Mother Nature brings. That being said, the staff is going to continue to work with the Attorney General's office to develop the scope of work that follows the strategies that were laid forth in the demand management policy. That's the best way to get a meaningful process forward. So I have said before, failure is not an option. We will sit here and work with our stakeholders as we move forward in this process. So I want to thank you all for your input. It did not go unnoticed. The product you have here before you here today is because of the input. So I want to thank the board especially for that.
All right. Thank you, Director Mitchell. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, we shall proceed to vote. All those in favor of staff recommendation on agenda item 20, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. All right, thanks again, and thank you to all your board members. And actually, this is the last agenda item on our meeting. So thank you all for your attendance. And we learned earlier from Director Wells that I get to drive the pollinator highway home. We had an executive order about pollinators that Dr. Randall or Director Randall shared with us. So I'm going to go home on the pollinator highway. And if you need to use the restroom, use it here. My call is on downstream. So thank you all for coming. And this adjourn. Oh, I need a motion to adjourn. It's been moved by Director Gallagher, seconded by Director Trick, that we adjourn the meeting. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, we shall proceed to vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you all.